All right, Bruchim Abayim, welcome everyone. It's an interesting question, rather ambiguous question and difficult to answer. When did Judaism become a recognized religion? Was it before or after the establishment of Israel as a nation? Well, the first question is, what do you mean the establishment of Israel as a nation? The Bible says, Hayom azani yesel ha'am. This day you became an am. The word am could mean nation or people. It could also just simply mean religious community. In Islam, they refer to the community of Muslims as the Ummah, which is the same, it's a cognate of that Hebrew word Am. And so if the identity of the Muslim community is called Ummah, we can compare it as a Semitic language with similar roots. We can understand that this idea of the identity of the Jewish peoplehood is a religious identity, and not, as many secularists would claim, that it is a secular identity. Indeed, the Jewish identity of the Jewish people is totally linked with religion. And also, with that being said, we see that the religious and national, quote-unquote, lack of a better term, identity of the Israelites is connected to receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai before the people settled in the Holy Land. So it's not the Holy Land that makes us a nation, it's not our language, it's not the shared culture. So this idea of nationalism is really rather foreign. This 1890s idea of nationalism is rather foreign to the Jewish identity, and it was something that was only introduced later and opposed by the great majority of rabbis. Now, with that being said, at that time in history, there was really no difference between a national identity and a religious identity. A nation was identified by its gods. Often that would be a local issue, but not always. And this, that the Israelites worshiped the one creator God as opposed to a pantheon of many lesser gods, was what made the distinction of the Israelites at that time in history. And of course, the influence that the Jewish people had on the rest of the world is what led to most of the world accepting from us the ideas of monotheism, which have been spread to the world through Christianity and Islam. In Islam, it's a more pure type of monotheism, but Christianity nonetheless is also a monotheistic Abrahamic religion. Despite the issues with their theology of the Trinity that most Christians profess. And that, now, there are other times in history which we could point to as the recognition of Judaism as religion. First of all, the term Judaism we first find historically, that I could find, if anyone finds something earlier, let me know, would be in the Deuterocanonical book of 2nd Maccabees. I think there's about 3 places in the book of 2nd Maccabees where the term, that the Greek term that would be translated as Judaism, first appears. And there it is in comparison to Hellenism, that many Jews abandoned Judaism and adopted the Greek culture. And so you have this difference of Hellenism and Judaism being those who remain faithful to the ancient Jewish practices. So it was not at that point and earlier, nothing had changed in Judaism. What changed was what was around Judaism. And so that's why the word Judaism was essentially invented to accentuate that contrast between Hellenism and Judaism, which is what the holiday of Hanukkah coming up very soon is all about. About 10 days from now is Hanukkah, as I'm recording this. And so in that certain sense where you had people who were Jews who left Judaism, and so you had that distinction between Judaism and Hellenism, that is where Judaism could perhaps be understood in that sense as a recognized religion, even though it was something that had existed for a long time before that. In a similar vein, you could go back earlier and speak of Jews who remained true to Judaism, although it wasn't called that yet, during the Babylonian exile and the Persian exile, which even more so in the Persian exile we have in the end of the 9th chapter of the book of Esther in the Bible. It says V'raba me'amei haaretz misyahadim, and many of the people of the land, the verb there could be understood as became Jews or adopted Judaism, which means that there was a tremendous amount of conversion to Judaism after the miracles of Purim, as recorded in the book of Esther. Which also, even though conversion to the Torah covenant was something that had existed long before that, and it was never only for the people who were born of the biological progeny of Jacob, it was always open to conversion. And so Ruth and Jethro and other people earlier in history converted into the Torah covenant, but that we see this idea of converting to Judaism and calling it Jewish is something we find in the book of Esther. That's because of the split of the kingdoms that had happened much earlier, that we already find this term Yehudim, Jews, being used already after the death of King Solomon. Once there was the split between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, that no matter which tribe you were from, if you lived in the northern kingdom, you were called Israelite, and if you were in the southern kingdom, you were called a Jew. You were called Yehudi. Again, it wasn't expressed so much as an ism, as much as the national identity at that point, but that transformation into something of a religion, I would say, was clearly, even though again nothing actually changed in the matters of the covenant or the matters of practices or beliefs, but the labeling system we could trace both from this idea of the mass conversions that took place in Persia to Judaism, whether they were sincere or not, which again we had also the Kuthians, which were later known as the Samaritans and still exist at this time, who underwent a conversion, but their conversion was done under improper auspices, and so was always somewhat suspect. But again, there you see this idea of this religious identity. Again, there, with the Samaritans, it was linked to the identity linked to the land, but once we went into exile, so you had in Persia this idea of Misyahadim, of becoming Jews, people who were not Jewish, who became Jews. And so that's definitely a religious identity. What just happened? I'm not sure what point that cut off, but again, that religious identity is something that became very clear in Persia, where you had non-Jews who converted to Judaism, and then in Jerusalem under the Hellenist rule, where you had people who were born Jewish who abandoned Judaism, and so there you have this clear identity of Judaism as a religion that someone from another religion could convert to, as we saw in Persia, and someone born Jewish could apostatize out of. Doesn't make them a Gentile, but they were nonetheless abandoning Judaism as an ism, and that's where the ism of Judaism really came into being under the Seleucid Hellenist rule. Now, later in history, then you had these ideas of recognized minority religions in various communities. And so, much later in history, when there started to be separation of religion and government to a small part, where you could be a member, legally be a member of another religion than the majority religion in a country, and be allowed to practice your faith as an equal citizen, and yet there were these various different approaches to it, whether there was official religion or not in different countries. So certain countries had the idea of recognized religion legally, as they still do today. So today in Germany, for example, you don't have the type of libertarian religious freedom that we have in America, but rather every religious community in Germany or some of the Scandinavian countries, they pay a tax to the government, and all clergy are government employees. And so the way I understand it, I could be wrong, but the example would be in Germany, there's a tax, a religion tax, and all people, and then they see a census of what religions people profess to belong to, and so that certain amount of a percentage will go to the Jewish community and the Lutheran community and the Muslim community and the Catholic community and so forth, in the sense that there is no religious freedom in Germany, but religious tolerance. I think it's to a lesser extent in England, and the British model is more or less what the modern state of Israel adopted, as opposed to the American Jeffersonian approach of total separation of church and state. Of which there is no established religion in any sense, except that there is recognition of various government chaplaincy forces and so forth in various government institutions. And so if you want to say in that sense, I'm not sure exactly what point in history you would want to identify that, whether it was when the Jewish communities were given certain rights in various communities. So for example, we mentioned Germany in the 1500s, 1600s, the Jewish community had to answer to the Christian community. And so there are records in Germany of when the Jewish community would elect officers in the synagogue as lay leaders of the community. And they would have to have the approval of the local bishop, whether earlier it was Catholic and later it was Lutheran, or whatever Protestant denomination that there was. All of these various denominations all had to be recognized within that milieu, that the majority ruling denomination allowed tolerance of the minority religions, and it was under the auspices of the church. That was the historical way that it worked. If you will look in Minhage Vermisa, the customs of worms in Germany, you will find the appointment of the parnes, of officers in lay leadership roles who needed to have an appointment by the local Christian, whatever denomination at the time, earlier Catholic and later Lutheran or whatever it was, that the local bishopric had to approve the Jewish lay leaders, and I believe they also had to approve of the rabbis as well. I don't recall reading that, but I believe that was included as well. So would you want to say that that is a certain point of recognition of Judaism as a religion, or the point where in other countries, like we said, that there was equality of religions, there was no longer a single state religion, but nonetheless tolerance and registration of these religions, which would include Judaism, to the point where in the United States you don't really have that same type of registration system for a religious entity in any way that a secular nonprofit would be different, with the exception again of chaplaincy work, of which in the military and in prisons and other state institutions and federal institutions, there are various rules and regulations of how these different religions are recognized, and what does that mean historically for those religious communities. So there really is no single answer to this, but I would say that the most important event was the giving of the Torah at Sinai, and that's what the Bible says. This is the day that you have formed into a community. That would be my response to this question. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Check out our channel for more discussions, and I appreciate if you watch all the way through. We are trying to do a giveaway. If you look on on my channel, there is a video that is talking about this giveaway. Once that reaches 300 views, we want to give away one of my books. I have many books for sale on Amazon. We're thinking maybe doing some more, perhaps some of our questions that we've written out on Quora.com. Something I'm thinking of. We'll see how that works. All right, God bless. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. We make many of our videos based on the comments we receive, questions that we receive in the videos below. All right. How do I turn this off?